Nobody was allowed to challenge the authority of the Pope or the Catholic Church. If anybody dared, so you're allowed to do whatever you want, you can practice, but Islam is the superior religion. You have to avoid blasphemy. You cannot criticize the Islamic faith. You cannot question anything. You cannot challenge anything. There were restrictions on building synagogues and churches. There was no restrictions for making mosques. Group attacks were very active, and they were taken to strange places and beaten up thoroughly, because these were the kind of jihadis who considered that every single individual around you are to be converted by either. There are some Catholic scholars, I would one day keep up that. I've read a lot about that period. If you take a bath, it was a sin. You're not allowed to take a bath. You could wash your armpit and your private parts with water in a tub only. And if you take a bath, the fundamental question that comes up so regularly about the Spanish Islamic Empire is connected with the great culture attributed to it. At a time when the whole of Western Europe was under the control of the Catholic Church, there was another empire in Spain, in the present-day Spain, which had an altogether different attitude and approach to global issues. While the mainstream Europe under Catholic Church was very intolerant to all different opinions and intolerant to anything that was against the views that were the official version of the faith, the Spanish kingdom is considered to be a tolerant kingdom, where people of three different faiths lived in harmony. That's how it is presented. That is why it's known as the golden age of Islam. That's how it is generally categorized. So people like M. Roy has glorified this period and has written books about that. On the other side, there are people who try to tell that it was not that glorified a picture if we go deep into the whole thing. It cannot be compared to what we understand as tolerance in the modern age, but it was something a bit different, perhaps tolerant than the empire of Muhammad, which was some years before where this new kingdom started. I hope you understand the period very clearly. The period of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, Muhammad, was living from 570 CE to 622 CE. That was the period. That is when Islam was established, and that was when Quran was officially came as a revelation, and the basic tenets of Islam was established. Now, a few years later, in 756, that's precisely 100 years plus, 120 years later after Muhammad's death, a part of Spain was defeated, and the new kingdom emerged there. And this kingdom is generally known as the Moorish Kingdom. And you know, in Shakespeare's Othello, you hear about Othello as a Moor. The Moorish Kingdom was center of trade. Generally, it's conceived, or generally it's believed, that's the more correct word, that the Spanish or Moorish Empire, which is considered to be the golden empire of Islam in Europe, as one of the most tolerant kingdoms in Europe of those times. It's also presented as the golden era of Europe, mainly because at the same time, you had a very repressive Catholic Church. controlling almost all of Europe and controlling the entire spectrum of knowledge or public life or the kingdoms and the military and the whole political structure. Nobody was allowed to challenge the authority of the Pope or the Catholic Church. If anybody dared, they were arrested, stopped, persecuted, or they were tyrannized so hard, and there were torture machines to handle them. The church has established various torture machines to handle people who were criticizing it. All those people who believed in any other belief before the Catholic Church established its belief were called pagans. And they were punished, executed. That is why this period is generally explained by many people as a very tolerant part of Europe, which was different. Also, one has to make another comparison. The basic idea of the Catholic Church that controlled mainstream Europe at that time was that the whole knowledge is based on divine knowledge. And it's the whole custodian of that knowledge who will delegate that information and knowledge to the kings was the Pope. Pope was all powerful. At the time, the period of Muhammad, you know that that was 570 to 622 CE. Muhammad was establishing his empire and kingdom in the present-day Arabia, and his successors have been expanding the empire, and that has been a kind of a special expansion which insisted on conversion. Wherever they defeated, they forced people to believe, or they were suppressed. But was it exactly like that as it is presented now? We have one very clear example, that was the Moorish Kingdom of Spain. That was in, something like 120 years after Muhammad's death. So this is supposed to be the golden age of Muslims. That is how it is presented. You know, the difference than the mainstream Islam that we know from Arabia and the Moorish Empire in Spain is very simple. It accepted people of other faiths to live there. Second thing, it accepted inquiry, studies, music, dance, establishment of different forms of alcohol. So that was the kind of new Moorish Islamic empire. And there was a conflict from the very beginning. So it begins from the exact time is 711. So that's exactly a century after Muhammad. The whole history is very simple. That the Catholic king in the Moorish area was under great threat with his neighbors, and his political power was challenged. And he was under a political threat. So he invades. If you know the geographical position of Granada, that's the southernmost tip of Europe. Next to that is the present-day Morocco. It's northern Africa, just across. And Arabia very closely. So this geographical situation has been giving a kind of a special access to the sea at one side, special access to northern Africa and the world of Arabian kingdoms on the other side. So unlike many parts of Europe, which was landlocked, here there was one special part which could reach out to the big other continent, especially Northern Africa was very, very active. You have Egypt there, you have Morocco there, you have a lot of powerful kingdoms and systems existed there. So now, how do you consider this as a free period? Can be discussed in the later part of this discussion. And before coming to that, I would like to tell you a story about my own visit to Granada in 2014. I was invited by a professor named Isa, who was a teacher of sociology, to give a lecture in the Granada University. And I spent almost a week there, walking around, seeing a lot of different historical monuments and the famous Alhambra fort. That was the last kingdom in Spain of Muslims, the Kingdom of Granada. So it was not called the Kingdom of Granada. Now it is known as the Kingdom of Granada because Granada was the last part, last unit that existed. So what one sees there is something different than the mainstream Spain. The whole architecture is very different. It's not the cathedrals that has been, that's seen all around Spain that you see in Granada. Granada, you see a lot of mosques. Practically, they were mosques, but the mosques were captured by the Catholic Church. And above most of the mosques, you can see a crescent, which was part of the Islamic symbol. But above the crescent, you can see a cross to show that the crescent is defeated by the cross. The crescent they kept, and over the crescent, they established a cross everywhere. And the mosques were turned into Catholic prayer homes or later cathedrals. This is something quite unique because in main Europe, you had other faiths existing earlier, which they call the pagan faith, the Norse faith, for example, in Germany, or in the Scandinavian part, you have Odin and Thor and all these kind of gods. But here, there was an area where Christians lived earlier and Jews lived earlier, and there were political conflicts, and there comes Islam. And Islam comes with it comes with a very special mission. If you understand what is Islam in Arabia, wherever they have gone, they have been defeating all the opponents. Here, they did not do that. They were invaded. That was the key of the whole thing. They were invaded there by the then king because he was in a conflict. He wanted the support from across the sea to fight a local enemy. Another Catholic king who was troubling him, Roderick was his name. And of course, the Muhammad's army come, not Muhammad, but his name was Muhammad, and he comes. It's a huge army that comes and helps him. The enemy of the local king was defeated. But the price was very high. What he expected was, on a payment, on certain conditions, he would get a support of some military, and he would win the opponent, and he would reward them and send them back. But they didn't go back. They remained there, and the army started expanding further and further and further. And they established their own new kingdom there. So if you consider what is tolerance and what is coexistence in 21st century Britain, or in main part of Western Europe, can that be compared with the so-called celebrated Islamic tolerance there? That's an interesting question. I have some facts here. What was the tolerance there? I mean, I would read from a very famous article. This was published by a scholar and reproduced by BBC. What was the life of Muslims in Spain? That's the first thing we should know. Muslims were the leaders. It was generally understood that Islam is the faith. It's celebrated that it was tolerant to Muslims, to Christians and Jews. So, well, they had citizenship, but by law, second-class citizenship. By law, a second-class citizenship. But it's still a kind of citizenship. But you have to remember that in many other kingdoms, people of other faith did not have citizenship. Here, the Jews and Christians would get citizenship, but they have to pay an additional tax, the jizya. That was one of the conditions. It's like the famous story of the camel that enters the tent. They came in, helped, and defeated. And they controlled the whole area. Eventually, it becomes very complicated. From 756, when the total dominance come, till 1031, you can see this empire remains there. It's a very powerful force. So it continues further, but its size shrinks and shrinks later because of the Crusades meantime beginning. So how do you say that it's a golden age of Islam? You have two comparisons. Muhammad's Islam in the Arabian Peninsula and the Spanish Islam or the Moorish Islam in southern Spain. They were miles apart and they were different. In Spain, they allowed trade was the major thing. So they allowed trade. They wanted the Jews to remain there because Jews were the moneylenders. And they wanted the Christians to remain there because they were the entrepreneurs. And the new people kept all these people. They were allowed to live there. They were allowed to do their business. They were allowed to have everything that they have. But they had a special status that they were, of course, they could even serve the king in the royal palace. But to be in the city, Muslims did not have to pay any special tax, but the non-Muslims had to pay a special tax. That was one categorization of handling non-Muslims. The other side of it, the difference, it's enlisted by a very famous scholar countering the argument that this was a golden age. That's what I wanted to say again. So the other side of the argument of the golden age, they were not forced to be in ghettos, whereas Jews were in ghettos all around. All other places, the people who were not in the mainstream faith were pushed away in ghettos. It was sidelined, but they were not. They were not in any special locations. They were scattered amongst other population. In most of the civilizations, the opponents were, or people who are not of the same faith, were captured as slaves. So here, no. That's why it is considered a golden age. You cannot compare it with what we understand as a golden age from now. From those times, well, anybody who believes in a different faith, if they were defeated, they would be captured as slaves. They were not slaves. They could live as citizens. Then, another major interesting thing, during Muhammad's expansion, people were forced to convert to Islam. Here, they were not forced to convert to Islam. They were allowed to live as Jews and Christians. So it's comparatively very, very, you have to see the historic period and you have to see the comparative position, how it existed in other parts of the dominance of Islam and how it was existing here. So they were not forced to convert to Islam. They were not banned to do any special kind of jobs. Jobs were not reserved for a special religion. Every job was open for everybody. And then, for example, some of the jobs, they were not banned. For example, in many parts of the world, butchery was a monopoly of Muslims. that looks not very celebrating now, but those times butchery was very important. That's the control of the major food, the quality food. So whomsoever is in control of the butchery is in control of the best meat. So butcheries were not allowed for other people in Islamic areas, whereas here it was allowed to other people also to be butchers. Then also present jobs like banking and all were allowed. Like the Jews were the main bankers and the investors. They could join the civil services. In the royal services, they could join. So they were allowed to contribute to the culture. That's another interesting side of the Moorish Empire. This is something like you can compare it with the Mughal period of Shah Jahan. There was music, there was art, there were paintings, sculpturing, everything was allowed. That makes it different. Because in the other parts where Islam was in power, they did not allow sculpturing, they did not allow painting, they did not allow music, they did not allow dancing. So this was all allowed. They enjoyed the new world, which was part of Europe. And in fact, Islam transformed itself and adapted to the new situation, which cannot be compared with the present day idea of intolerance or great civilization. But if you compare it with those people who were around, if you see Europe, that was the Dark Ages controlled by Catholic Church. If you look at the Arabian Peninsula and other parts of Islam, that was the Mohammedan, radical position of absolute control. So this was an oasis in between the hardcore Islam on one side and the hardcore Catholicism on the other side. This was something very different where people coexisted. That was the importance of the Moorish Islamic Empire. Another thing, they encouraged literature. They encouraged writing, poetry. On the other side, any kind of literature was banned by the Catholic Church. Later, of course, you know that any kind of manuscript would need an imprimatur of the Pope, the stamp of acceptance. Otherwise, it has no value. In the Islam, the radical Islam on the other side, in the Arabian Peninsula and Northern Africa, there also they considered Quran as the ultimate knowledge, and there is nothing else beyond or after that. And for Catholic Church, everything is God-given and divine, and that's coming through the Pope, and Pope is the representative of the God here on earth, and it's fully under their control. Look at this little oasis, which is very different. Why it becomes different? Because it's that period. It's the 8th century. That was the difference. So then it grows. Then the other side, one sees the positive side first. But on the other side, can it be compared with the modern idea of a tolerant society or a developed society, or where people live in coexistence? What could be attributed, if you look from the present day context, what is wrong with them? Let's see what are the things. One was, to be a citizen, you have to acknowledge the superiority of Islam. That was important. Islam was the superior religion. That you have to accept. You can have your faith, but it's probably like the Zoroastrianism now in Iran. So you're allowed to do whatever you want. You can practice, but Islam is the superior religion. You have to avoid blasphemy. You cannot criticize the Islamic faith. You cannot question anything. You cannot challenge anything. There were restrictions on building synagogues and churches. There was no restrictions for making mosques. There is a huge difference. You think that they were all coexisting. Of course, they could do business because that was part of the economy. They wanted to keep the economy running, and they wanted to go the system running. They encourage everything that's possible, but they did not encourage their religion. They were not allowed to make churches or synagogues. It needed special permission, and it was normally very, very difficult. So another major thing, no Christian and no Jew was not allowed to carry any weapons. That is only allowed for Muslims. So nobody can be a threat to the Islamic community or the system. If you happen to be a Christian, if you happen to be a Jew, you cannot hold a knife for self-protection. But a Muslim was allowed to have it. So any kind of weaponry was banned for non-Muslims. Then another major, you cannot, that's a very interesting thing. Your properties, you cannot give it in inheritance to a Muslim. Your properties can only be inherited by a person of your religion. Why? Because that's always connected with certain faith and structures. If it's inherited by a Muslim, he will have to run it in the format where it was going, and that will be bringing in Islam open to other faiths. Therefore, a non-Muslim is not allowed to inherit anything or give by a will to anybody, anything to a Muslim. That was a very strange thing. You can own slaves always. I mean, those times people could buy slaves and keep slaves. But a non-Muslim is not allowed to have a Muslim slave. But Muslims are allowed to have non-Muslim slaves. So, I mean, it's not equal. There were certainly second-class citizens, but even that is comparatively different if you consider what was there in the Catholic Europe. That is how it's important, but don't glorify it beyond a certain point. So if one marries a Muslim, that's another reason why this inheritance is not allowed to a Muslim person. Marriages were allowed between people of other faith and Muslims. But if you marry a Muslim, it's not very interesting, because if the children should be Muslims and they cannot inherit the parents' property, unless the person turns into a Muslim. If the father turns into a Muslim, yes, they can inherit. If he remains as a Christian or Jew, the property cannot be inherited, because there is total, it's a kind of huge persuasion that they forced. Because if you want to be in companionship or a joint life with a Muslim, and if you want to have a proper family and inherit things to your children, you have to convert to Islam. It's a kind of hard persuasion, but by law, you cannot inherit anything to your children if you're a non-Muslim. Then they were called dhimmis. The dhimmis cannot give evidence in a court. Another thing, a man cannot marry a Muslim woman, but a Muslim man can marry. That comes in the later part. So after a certain time, this was questioned, then the laws changed. A man cannot marry a Muslim woman, whereas a Muslim man can marry a Jew woman or a Christian woman. So again, the whole structure is changed. So there is very clear discrimination against people of other faiths. It's celebrated everywhere. That's why I wanted to specifically say that it's glorified and said, repeatedly, that it was one of the most wonderful period in Europe. But let's not overestimate things. Let's acknowledge what were correct, and let's make it very clear what was not correct in our standards now. So it was of course a golden period because they encouraged collection of books. In fact, they have been collecting books from all parts of the world. When traders were going, they were encouraged to bring books, and that was taken as knowledge. On the other side, the Catholic part of Europe at that time discouraged books. They burned down libraries everywhere. Here, libraries were encouraged. Inquiry, technology was encouraged. In a way, scientific attitude to changing things was encouraged. This had a great influence on Europe later. That is why some of the historians or some of the most prominent observers of this period, like M.N. Roy, has been mentioning these people, these Moors, have been opening up Europe during the Dark Ages. That is how he sees it, because this did not end there. This did not remain with Muslims only, because they have been, in fact, forcing people eventually to convert. Initially, they were not doing it. Now, the conversion patterns, that's also very interesting. They came as, they were invited in a crisis to help their military, to get their military support to fight a local king. And they came and they eventually expanded their kingdom and established their empire. And they remained there for next several centuries. Now, many parts of Spain, you can see that they accept the Islamic culture. The veil comes, hijab. So they encourage hijab, but not parda. So many Europeans in the Spanish area, they started wearing hijab. Though they didn't take the faith, but that becomes a universal thing at the time. And people started getting Arabic names. The whole of this part, people were getting Arabic names. That's how the whole conversion begins. And suddenly we can see another major thing. This is Islam and the Dimitude. There is a famous book in 2002 written by Bath Ayer. And I read a quote from that. Society was sharply divided along ethnic and religious lines. It began differently, with the Arabic tribes on the top of the hierarchy, followed by the Berbers, who were never recognized as equals. Despite their Islamization, the people who were converted also were not taken as equal citizens. The people with the Arab origin who were migrating along with the army, they were the superior people. The new converts, you see that they were, inferior to them. So the lower in the scale came in the Mullaudan converts, and at the bottom, the Chimmi Christians and Jews, which means society was stratified into several segments. At the top, you have the Arab Muslims, then the converted Muslims, then if you have a relation in a marriage with a Muslim, they are still down there. Their rights started becoming inferior and inferior and inferior. The original idea of coexisting, which they claim they would be bringing in, eventually started diminishing. So then another side of it is, this is from another book, Jews of Islam. Bernard Lewis has written a book that is speaking about, in contrast to Christian anti-Semitism, the Muslim attitude towards non-Muslims is one not of hate or fear or envy, but simply contempt. There was no hate, there was no enmity, but they were, seen with a contempt. So now coming to 12th century, the 12th century ruling is marked as follows. The Muslim must not massage a Jew or a Christian, nor throw away his refuse, nor clean his latrines. The works were divided. It comes like the caste system. Certain jobs are given to Muslims only. Certain jobs cannot be taken by other people. For example, one of the major comforts of getting a massage, where a Muslim cannot give a massage to a Jew or a Christian, they should find their own massagers. The Jew and the Christian are better fitted for their trades, such trades. What kind of trades? For example, the home refusers, the garbage pickers, the cities are developing. The garbage collectors were Christians and Jews. And Muslims should not do that because it is more fitting to the other people. It's a kind of, how caste system evolved. This is the same period. The hierarchical structures are emerging under Islam. So the garbage collecting, cleaning of toilets and latrines, or carrying human excreta was in quote, the privilege of the Jews and Christians, and the Muslims would not do it. So you see a kind of a hierarchical structure emerge in the society. something very similar to Indian caste system in the golden era of Islam. This is quite amazing, and many people did not go deep into these kind of things. And there are now a lot of books coming with a lot of factual evidences. Why? Then there's a serious question. Why the non-Muslims were tolerated there? That was not the case in different parts of the authority of Islam. You have seen that. I mean, they were not tolerated. They were captured as slaves, or they were sold, or their rights were taken, and they were forced to convert in other parts. So in the golden era of Islam in Spain, well, they were still tolerated here. So they have a feeling that they are of the same faith, but they are wrong people only. They also believe in everything comes from Abraham, and I mean the whole story. Muslims consider, for example, Jesus as another prophet, but they are wrong people. Islam is the right position. They are wrong people, but coming from the same scheme of thought. So another thing is, they wanted administration running. They didn't have enough good administrators. And monetary handling was more efficient because most of the entrepreneurial money was in the control of the Jews. And Christians were mainly entrepreneurs, and Jews were mainly money lenders. And there emerges a new tribe of people, the traders, the people go for international trade. International trade became a major part of the whole structure. And why this change comes? That is what gives an idea why this empire collapsed also. The original idea of a tolerant new world, where the new people who came there are tolerating the local people, and they are coexisting with them, like in the Ottoman Empire. In the beginning of the Ottoman Empire also, they did the same thing, but eventually everything turned. But over the years, every other people were subjugated because the Muslim clerics started interpreting Quran in a different way than the original people who established this regime. They wanted more and more people converted to Islam, forced to Islam. But when they are converted to Islam also, the hierarchical position gives the Arab Muslims a higher position, and the other people were lower in the strata. And people of other faith were getting bad jobs, and their position started declining. They were not in ghettos, but their living standards systematically declined. So there were two sets of unhappy people in the New Kingdom. The people who were underprivileged, mainly the Jews and Christians at one side, and on the other side, the people who felt that they converted, but they are not treated as equals. They were lesser people in front of Allah or the faith system, though they were Muslims. So there was a hierarchical position within Islam, and there was a segregatedly different people. Though they were allowed to live there, they were allowed to do business, but their living standards started declining systematically. Over generations, it continues. Now, the new set of religious campaigners emerged. They wanted Islam to be established in the fullest form of it. They started a kind of aggressive campaign for Islam. Every Jew and every Christian was given a Quran. If you refuse a Quran, that was taken as a crime. That you see by 12th century. If a Quran is given to you, you have to take it and take it to your home. You can have your faith, but when you refuse it, it becomes a crime. So these kind of ideas were promoted by the fundamentalist forces or Islamist groups who were getting more and more control in the system. What you see is that the conventional idea of an open Islam, tolerant to other faiths, fade away over centuries, and the Islamic scholars who wanted to interpret their faith in the classical way with the predominance of Islam and everybody surrendering to Islam, eventually taking place, replacing the present structure. Now, the situation totally changes from 8th century to 12th century. By 12th century, you see a segregated society. People have no option, but they still live there. But because over centuries they have been living there, they cannot go. Where do they go? If they want to go, they have to cross the sea and go to North Africa or further away to Arabia. And the mainstream Spain was full of fanatic Catholics, and nothing would be tolerated there on the other side. And you have to understand that the Reformation started in 1500s, and before that, in the 11th century, we see a pogrom starting, elimination of the other people, like in Jewish, like the Jewish, mass killing that happened during Hitler's time, like the Holocaust. A kind of a systematic elimination of people of other faith starts. Not by the kingdom. The set of fanatics go and attack the other people. They're forced. Group attacks were very active, and they were taken to strange places and beaten up thoroughly, because these were the kind of jihadis who considered that every single individual around you are to be converted by either by promoting the idea, or if that's not possible, by force. And these groups started forcing the kingdom at one side and encouraging a shift to radical Islam. So the political authority had only two options: get the wrath of the clergy at one side, and risk the authority that they have on this system. On the other side, get with these people who were otherwise suppressed. No, that was not very easy. So there was a dramatic change that happens when the pressure of the clergy goes and goes and goes, and people feel more and more troubled. There is a dramatic change that happens in the last part of the Moorish Empire. You can see that when they became more intolerant, then when they became more radical, then they were forcing other people. People started leaving the area. They tried to go to the Catholic area. And some of these, the empire's size started shrinking. It became easier for the invading force from all sides to come into, because there were a lot of unhappy people. Most of the time they cooperated with the invading people because they wanted change, because they were suppressed. So because of the wrong policy of non-tolerance, because of the wrong policy of discriminating people on the basis of their faith, which originally was not existing, people were coexisting, and it was very easy. It was almost a walkover that they got in the 8th century, because everywhere people accepted them, because they allowed them to have trade. They offered equality. They offered a different kind of Islam that was, than that was existing in Northern Africa and Arabia. They said they are encouraging art and culture and everything, which is different from the Catholic dominated structures. And this was welcomed by people, and they took more and more, areas into their control, and it was expanding. And suddenly the clergy started tightening the whole structure, and that started decline. A similar pattern you can see in the Mughal Empire also. It's a classical comparison with that. After Shah Jahan, you see that Aurangzeb coming. He becomes a radical Muslim. He started the special tax on other people. The same way, he insisted on stopping of music, stopping of dancing. He has been probably a very, very simple person. Stitching his own kurta. That's not, or his own prayer cap. That's how he's glorified. But on the other side, he started discriminating people. He became intolerant to other faiths. And the same thing happened after a certain time. After the period of, after Akbar, Jahangir, of course, had a short period only. Akbar was such an open person to all different faiths. He tolerated everything in the Mughal period in India. And Shah Jahan, you see the celebration of art and culture and architecture at one side. And then comes Aurangzeb, and the whole situation changes. The same thing. And there begins the decline of the Mughal Empire. Here also, the intolerant presentation of Islam began the decline of the empire. But one has to also remember that the Alhambra fort is a symbol. Alhambra it means that it, by word meaning, it also means the red-colored fort. Though it's not really red, it's a little whitish building, but on the evening, when the sun comes, it turns almost red because of the evening light. It turns like a red-colored fort. Alhambra is a red fort, and that's intact now. I've been there, and there are a lot of wonderful studies about the Alhambra fort. It's an architectural marvelous. I show you a picture of Alhambra. I mean, those who are seeing it in the Zoom, and this is the Alhambra fort, and the kind of architecture resembles the Mughal period. It's beautiful structures and dancing places and sculptures, all were there. So Islam did not allow that, but in Alhambra, you can see sculptures, you can see paintings, you can see the dance halls, and you can see big, huge bowls of wine to be kept for public use. When the court functions were happening, when the huge dances were happening, people could come and take their wine and drink till they fall down. So that was a different kind of Islam. Still, while they were insisting on all these different kind of discriminatory rules upon the people over the centuries, the golden era turns into a kind of a dark age. But in the palace, in the Alhambra fort, you can see things were still different. They were celebrating everything. So there were two different classes are there in this society. And one class is not on the basis of their economic standards, but on the basis of their origins. There was no equality. Arab Muslims at the top, the people who were serving the royal palace, of course, they were associates of that. You can be a Christian or Jew to be in the royal service. Of course, you can do that. But if you marry a person of a different faith, then you are a second-class citizen. And if you are not an Arab, but still a converted Muslim, still you are a second-class citizen. And this hierarchical structures come, and eventually it becomes a very hierarchical, something like very similar to Indian hierarchical caste system. That is, I've been always, before understanding the structure of the celebrated Spanish Golden Age, I never, imagined that such kind of a hierarchical structure could emerge on the basis of their birth and their origins in other parts of the world. And that is exactly, like how the caste system has been developing, it has been existing in the Moorish society. So the social division was very, very harsh. Then comes a big change. That was a dramatic change. Closer to the end of the empire of Granada, you have to also see that during this time, the Catholic Church has been trying to win over the domain controlled by the Muslim emperors. The Crusades started. Islam was expanding, and the Spanish Empire was expanding, and it reached almost the present-day Spain. They have almost expanded to that. And at a certain time, they expanded even to the present-day France. Imagine, it was such a huge empire. Then it started declining and diminishing in size, mainly because there were a lot of inner conflicts. There were a lot of unhappiness because of the discrimination, and discrimination against those people who were not Muslims. And even to those people who were converted, they were still looked down. And even those people who married and they came to Islam, they were also looked down. And people of other faiths were still looked down. And that was a totally hierarchical society with a lot of discrimination all around. This reduced the spirit of patriotism. And nobody wanted to defend this kingdom anymore. Nobody fought vigorously. Less and less people wanted to fight for their empire or kingdom. So it became, again, there is a parallel to India. For example, the military was limited to a certain set of people, and many people who were able to join, for example, in an army to defend them, they were not allowed by virtue of their caste in India, and they could not join it. Similarly, many people were not allowed to join the army. So they were second-class citizens, and they were not taken in confidence, and the system could not hold itself, and it started shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So then there is a huge change. This was all under the pressure of the Islamic scholars or the clerics who wanted to turn this into a classical Islamic empire. At one time, also one has to imagine, they wanted to establish this as the caliphate of Islam, the world quarters of Islam. Once they declared that, something like the Baghdadi has declared, the leader of ISIS has declared. He also said that he's the caliph of the Muslims. So here they declared that they are the caliphs of the whole Muslims of the world, and they became more and more rigid in their structural implementation of faith upon other people, and the divisions began. Now comes a reversal in the last part of it. There was an effort to change the whole thing. The last kings of Granada tried to reverse the whole structure and fight back the clerics. That is where I see a classical comparison with, one has to understand that Granada was very, very rich because it was the center of trade. Because of the geographical position, it was a very advantageous position. They were trading with Northern Africa. They were trading with the Arabian countries. They were trading directly through the sea. It's a very, very, strategically important position, as well as for trade. It is a very interesting and important location that they have. So it became a rich center of wealth. And the wealth was another interest when this was being attacked by the invading crusaders. And the empire, which now reached up to France, started shrinking back and back and back, and it comes to the one small part of Spain. At that time, there was a second thought about the whole thing. They understood their mistake and started correcting. They wanted to transform everything back to the golden age. Real golden age began in the 8th century and declined into a fanatic and conservative Islamic territory. So then there was an effort to go back. Everything was re-established. So then the music has gone, the dances have gone, and there were rumors that the books will be burned. All these structures were there, but then there was a reversal. But this reversal was fatal. That was the fall of Granada. Why the reversal? What was the reversal? Reversal was they re-established pubs everywhere. The drinking culture, which is very part of the Spanish life. At one time, they stopped wine and beer, which normally, for a Muslim country, can there be wine and beer? Yes, in Moorish Islamic empire, there was wine and beer, abundantly flowing everywhere. The Spanish lifestyle never changed, even during the Islamic period. So it was stopped at one time by the influence of the clerics, but it came back. The dance houses were started again. The bath houses were started again. One has to remember that, in the early part of Islamic rule, whereas it was not allowed, they allowed public baths, swimming pools, dance halls, music centers, libraries, scientific research centers, everything they established. Now they started closing down everything and going back to classical Islam. And now there is an effort to go back to what it was originally in the 8th century, in 1700s. And that was fought by the fanatics within. They wanted to overthrow this government and establish a classical Islamic government. And that was the right moment for the invaders. And the king of Granada thought that he would get the whole nation behind him when the papal army was coming. The Pope sent army to defeat Granada, the last fort of Islam in Spain. And forces were coming from the present-day France and Germany, and they were going with the mission to establish the ultimate kingdom of Jesus Christ. The fight, one is the fight for Jesus Christ, on the other side there was a fight for Islam. That was the earliest stage. Now the fight for Islam was gone, and they wanted to establish a tolerant society where everybody lives happily, and they wanted to again go back to the golden age. But that was fought from within by the fanatics. And many people fought against the kingdom. There was rebellion, encouraged by the clerics. And that was the right time that the crusade army came, and that has ended the golden age of Islam. So that is known as this reconquista is how it is officially terminology. The terminology is known as reconquista. They were reconquering. The territory is lost for Jesus Christ on the other side. Not Jesus Christ, but for the Pope, correctly. Because Jesus was not very important in the Catholic structure, but the Pope was the most important person. The Pope and his army or his kingdoms defeat these people in reconquista. And you know what happened then? And of course, the king has, there was an agreement. He has surrendered, and sovereignty was surrendered to the invading army, with one condition, that he would get a free passage, and his people who supported him should get a free passage to Northern Africa. That was encouraged. You know, that's a classical case of how religions can transform and damage people's life. People are living happily there. And then came one faith which offered, of course, they had a problem that there were a lot of intolerance, and they wanted their freedom, and that was offered. And those people who offered freedom, and of course they have offered a kind of a free society with tolerance and mutual support and coexistence and everything for a couple of centuries, and everything transformed, and it went back worse than to a situation worse than what they had earlier. Now the Reconquista control the new situation, but they made an agreement. The agreement that everybody with the Islamic faith can remain there peacefully. They can do whatever business they had. There won't be any kind of persecution. That was one of the agreement. And those all who want to leave the country and go can go. They would get a free gateway without any trouble. But a lot of people started going. And it's around 200,000 people have left the place. They've gone to Northern Africa and other places. Everybody who could afford went off. And those people, it's like India and Pakistan, and where people were running from one place because of the faith, a faith dominating one place. So, there are classical parallels everywhere. So now, the remaining people who could not afford were comparatively second-class citizens already under the Islamic regime, who were Muslims, but still second-class citizens remained there. Those who could afford, they escaped. They went off. Now, they were all treated properly again in the beginning. There was an agreement that they would not be persecuted. That was a fine agreement, that a safe passage was offered, and other people should not be, attacked, and there will not be any forced conversion to Catholicism. This was the agreement of surrender in Reconquista, and the emperor gets a safe passage. He goes off. But after some time, the attitude changes, And the Muslim community found that, it's more and more Catholicism coming. And there was an unrest growing. And precisely that's what they wanted. How to suppress a set of people, promote unrest and fear amongst them. And when the uprising begins, suppress them thoroughly. Like in Poland, the Jews were totally suppressed. When the first uprising came, that was shown as a reason theatre to totally eliminate them. Here also, the Catholic kingdom or the Catholic authority encouraged a kind of a dissent. And when the dissent broke up, they suppressed the whole people. They forced conversion back to Catholic Church. Now, every single person in Granada had two opportunities: either to convert to Catholicism or leave the country. Just two options they had. And they would give a permission for anybody who wanted to leave the country and go to someplace. They allowed them. But in fact, they discouraged them because that would affect the system also. They made blocks for people to go, and all the useless people who are not productive, they allowed them to go. And people who were productive, who were part of the economic system, they tried to make obstacles and tried to force them to convert back to Catholicism. When I was in Granada, I was going around along with my host to many pubs, Saturday and Sunday evening, and we have been just walking around. And it was hot and summer, and whenever we are tired, we entered into some pub. I still remember the story I've told in some other meetings also. If somebody had heard it, please, sorry for that. But this is something very important. If you go to a pub in Granada, Granada is a beautiful city. If you ever go to Spain, don't forget to go to Granada. It's such a beautiful city with the medieval times and contemporary life coexist. You can see history in every little street. It's a small place, but you can, everything is marked. It's modern. Spain has marked every part of the city and explain it how important it is historically. Now you go to a pub, order a beer. In other parts you would get it, but in Granada you would get a free plate of food. They call it tapas, along with the beer. Could be potatoes, fried potatoes. It could be fried meat. It could be fried some fish sticks. Something you would get along with the beer. In normal pubs, you have to order it and you have to pay for it. Here it comes free of cost. Maybe the price of beer is added, to cover this also. But every time you don't order for the tapas. That's a rule it's a norm everywhere in Granada now. You go to any pub, the tapas comes free of cost, but you don't opt it. But the restaurant or the bar or the pub would give their choice of tapas to you. This has started during the Catholic time. They forced everybody to go, leave the country or convert. That was the option. Become part of their faith or leave. And they also want us to, before coming to that, I've seen the huge library that the earlier Islamic empire was keeping. A part of it was burned by the church because no knowledge is there beyond the divine knowledge. That was the idea of Muslims who invaded in many other places. They burned down libraries at many places. Here in Alhambra, in Granada, they collected books from everywhere. That was burned down. It took 14 days to burn the books totally. 14 days, day and out, it was burned. Still a part of it was saved. It's kept there so that I could see. It was an agreement that the major books about architecture, knowledge, and investigation and studies should be preserved. But anything that is poetry, art, literature, everything that is not, useful for our life or any kind of information in that were all banned. Any kind of poetry book, no, it's not allowed. Everything was burned down. It's a huge heritage we lost by this burning down. And now the new regime insisted on conversion, and those who remain should become Catholics or they should leave the country. But by giving this tapas in the pubs, the tradition comes from those times that when you get a tapas, you should eat it. But suddenly you would get a plate of pork, a mixture of pork in some food. That was an order, royal order, that you have to get it. And when you get it, if you're still a Muslim in your mind, or if you're still a Jew in your mind, you would not take the pork. By the way, in Islamic, the Moorish, Spanish Empire, pork was available everywhere for the Muslims and for the non-Muslims. And also those Muslims who wanted could have it, but by faith, they would not take it. Most of them would not take it, and Jews would not take it. And Christians could simply have pork. And all the people, including the Jews and Christians, used to drink wine and beer. And when they drink wine and beer, if they get pork, they would not take it. If they would not take it, they would be identified as secretly practicing their Jewish faith or, Christian, Islamic faith. So because for Jewish faith as well as for Islamic faith, eating pork is a very unacceptable thing. It's haram for them. It's forbidden for them. They cannot take it. So if you are in mind, if you are a Muslim, if you are a Jew, you would not take it. But if you are converted, even with your thought and mind and your life pattern, you would not mind, you would take it. If you take the pork, you're fine. If you do not take the pork, you are identified. There are secret police in every pub, every restaurant, every eating place, and you would be noted, and there will be experts coming and talking to you, and then you would be asked to change your mind. If you did not do it, you would now be going to the religious court and will be tried for having the wrong faiths which are not permitted by the Catholic Church. Your properties will be confiscated. You will get a time to totally convert. And if you do not do that, your property will be confiscated, or you'll be thrown out of the country after taking your property. And you can be sent in a ship going to North Africa, and you would simply go out of the country. And all such people were simply eliminated. And from a period where more than 80% of the population Muslims in that area, the Moorish Spain, not the whole of Spain, the Moorish Spain had, in certain parts, there were 80% of Muslims, of which more than 50%, out of this 80%, more than 50% were hierarchically low Muslims. One can say, for example, the converted Muslim, they were still low, or the people who came from the marriages with other religions, they were still low. All these structures were there. So Arabs were at the top, and these hierarchical Muslims, they all would now be thrown off. From the 80%, it came down to 0. Believe it or not, there were no single Muslim in the New Catholic Granada. Every single person was thrown out or converted. Now this whole Spanish Muslim population is something like 3-4%, mainly because from Morocco there is a lot of migration in late 1900s. Otherwise, it was less than 1% or 2%, the whole of Spain. But in the Granada area, the Kingdom of Granada, which was once ruled by Islam and was glorified as the world capital of the wise Islam, It was, in fact, to an extent, yes, which encouraged science and art and culture when the Dark Ages were dominating the whole of Europe. It has declined back into a fanatic Islam because they did not insist on the change and they did not take powerful action against the fanatics growing within, against the system. They succumbed to the religious clergy, they succumbed to these religious scholars, they succumbed to the religious experts who insisted on Quranic way of life and Quranic patterns and the conventional Islam to be established. The governments appeased them. More and more appeasement strengthened them. When you pressurize and when a royalty surrendered to that or succumbed to that or try to appease them, they get more pain, more power, and they start more and more pressure. And this declined the whole system. And finally, it ended the Empire of Granada, or the Alhambra fort collapses. So here is what I was always thinking in the last few days when I was hearing about the great new ideas about modernity coming in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, where they want now the great games are happening and women are coming out, and I mean there is mixing up of men and women, and women can drive, whereas on the other side in Afghanistan all these things are banned in the same kind of religion. But imagine coexisting of all these kind of things. In Saudi Arabia, for example, there are groups that are against opening up of Islam. Imagine, I mean, United Arab Emirates tried to explain that in another 20 years, they want to be like Western Europe. They want to open over the next 2 decades. It's a welcome sign. It's a welcome move, in my opinion. They want to embrace science and technology. This is what was to happen, because there was no reformation kind of thing. There was no inner change from a political structure in a very big way to transform the societies of tradition. This was a traditional society re-established in the classical early Muslim style. There is a huge difference between a modernized Islamic community and a very conservative Islamic community. You can see the difference. For example, if you go to Cairo, or if you go to Istanbul, they're also Muslims by heritage, but they live a modern life. But if you go to Saudi Arabia, the laws don't allow you to practice, a modern life. So now there is an effort to change it, but this change is going to be challenged by the forces within. Already you have seen in Saudi Arabia, there are groups already took positions against the government's effort to change. Some of the organizations, the Tabligh, for example, the Tabligh is officially against the Saudi Arabian effort to change. So it's banned now. If you remember Tabligh, Tabligh has every year they have every year or second year they have a huge conference near Delhi in India, in Nizamuddin. And last conference was very, very controversial because of the huge gathering after the spread of Corona. So this organization, which has its headquarters or the main center in Saudi Arabia, has been challenging the authorities' effort to transform the society, and now they are banned. And similar groups are very active in United Arab Emirates also. So I would appreciate the effort to transform the society. And any effort to transform a society, when it comes from the political power, it's more important because that's more powerful. People who want to make change can articulate ideas, and they will keep the ground ready for the change. But the real change will happen only when a political decision is made and it's implemented with a very clear mindset. If that's going to happen in Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, we have this classical example of the fall of Granada in our mind. There was a system which was progressive as compared to other parts of the world, though not in our standards now, where people, it was different from the existing different forms of Islam on other parts of the world. which existed for a long time, then declined into another fanatic North African-like or Arabian-like kingdom. And there was a change again to transform it. This transformation was challenged from within. And that challenge, they could not suppress. And any challenge, when you want to, really happen, you have to see that there should not be people fighting within. A transformation of a society needs full support. So there should be a huge campaign within these nations about the crux and the fundamentals of the ideas of this change. Without taking ideas to the people, you cannot change anything superficially. So therefore, political decisions, without the public getting ready for it, will not work. Or any effort to change a society without a political decision will not work. The classical example of Lasky, that it coexists. People who transform society works at two levels. One level is very simple, that they try to change. They bring in the ideas of change or new views and new worldviews to people. And they get the ground ready. Either their representatives become the people in power, or the power understands the requirement of the society which is getting ready. And if they don't cooperate, the center of power will change. These people will bring in new power, like what it happened in French Revolution, or they will transform themselves. So this is, if that is what is happening in Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, like what was happening in the last part of the Granada Kingdom, the mistake that they have done, that they were more and more appeasing to these people, trying to keep them and keep the change. They didn't want to denounce the control of the clerical power. They were afraid of it. If one needs change, you should not be afraid of different opinions. You should not be afraid of critical positions coming from within. One needs articulation and determination. And to transform a traditional society like Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates, it needs courage. And that courage also means addressing the potential enemy within. And that's the challenge that they have. And history has ample lessons in different parts to get at least similar models that existed in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanal. Before we go ahead with the question segment, please join this group. The name is Rationalist. We always update you with more socially relevant topics for discussion. So if you are a member, you will be notified. Participants can ask questions by raising their hands. Try to avoid too many statements. Be specific on questions. I think Kunyama is on Zoom. Please, you may ask a question. Thank you.
Okay. This was a great, interesting talk. Understood a whole lot. And you showed us how the class system existed outside of India, in Spain, Grenada, and all. And my question is, these people, exiled people like lost people, the Jewish people came to Cochin. They have a synagogue there. In this, likewise, the Christians also wandered, exiled to India. Did they settle somewhere in India too? Do you know? You think it is like that? Then these Moors tribe, maybe a small percentage are they still existed in Grenada or anywhere in Spain? I like to know that. Then we are welcome, Miss Shakti Edamaruku, to our group. It's very pleased to see you. You know, you are so blessed. You see, your father is talking and you are joining. I didn't have that an opportunity. My parents are past, you know. Even if my father would come, he's not here. So you should be so proud, you know, whenever you get time, please do come. Then another word, what happened to Subi? We don't see Subi for 3 weeks. What happened to her? I'd like to know, if you don't mind, please tell us.
First of all, Shakti, if she's still there, she's a very busy professional. I mean, that's why sometimes, I mean, she cannot come, but she's showing more and more interest, and she's supporting me a lot in a lot of technical things. She's a communication expert working for one of the major, international organizations. And yeah, she's a kind of diplomat. I mean, that's the profession that she has. Now, about Shubi. Shubi is now studying in London. I mean, of course, I mean, she moved from Delhi to London. She's studying for her master's in London. And she had examinations in the first week of 4th of January onwards. She had exams, and her brother is in the United States. And she has now gone to USA, and 26th she is back. Maybe next week onwards she will be there. Now, coming to the question, did you ask a question also, or just made a comment?
No, I asked, I like to know this wandered, exiled Jews and Christians, did they come to India like that? And also I see how the caste system and stuff came to India. Maybe it is came from that period of time. What is happening in Granada in Spain seems like very similar to me. Am I right, or I'm thinking wrong? Please explain.
Yeah, there's a very serious similarity between the caste system that developed in India and what the Muslims have been imposing on the Christians and Jews in Spain, which can be easily seen. For example, scavenging jobs, like taking away the garbage and carrying human excreta for disposal. I mean, these are the lowest Indian caste would do. The Moorish Spain, especially in the later part when the Muslim predominance come there, that was done only by Christians. That was the job given to them. No Muslim would do such a job. I mean, such divisions. I mean, this is something like almost. That's why I said that this is almost similar to caste system, though they call it with different names. Also, each social segment had a different name. Also, of course, that's different from what we have in India. But they have different names, like Cummins and all these kind of special names were given, and that was one of the reasons for the decline of that society. And if those were the people who, after the Catholics, I mean, there was no exodus at that time. In the later in the 13th century, when this was defeated by the Catholic forces, then the Muslims were, the Catholics were also brutal like the Muslims. They pushed away all the people, chased out, asked them to leave the country, either convert or leave the country. And at that time, with those kind of population, more than 100,000 people have left the country because they didn't want to change their faith. There's again a parallel between the division of India and Pakistan, how people were going from one side to the other. You can see all these kind of things there also. So now the Catholics have pushed these Muslims off, and where they have gone, Muslims, that is the most important thing. So there is no evidence that the Muslims migrated at that time from this area. There could be also the Moplas in Kerala were traders, of course. The Malabar coast, there were a lot of Arabs coming. Even before the time of Muhammad, they were coming there. They were traders. Even before Christianity came into existence, you can see the Arabs coming. They were Arabs till then. So then from 4th century, you can see the Christian presence there. So from Islam came almost at the same time in Lakshadweep and many coastal areas, especially in Malabar, you can see the presence of Islam at that time. But the Islamic migration to southern India is, I mean, as most of you may know it, I mean, it's very different than the Islamic migration to northern India. In northern India, it came with an invasion. The major, religious, influence was coming with invasion of, forces from outside. Here, they were traders. The Moplas were traders. There was no invasion scene there. So there's a classical difference between how the way Islam came in northern India and the way it came in the Malabar coast. So the traders, as they were called, also one has to understand that the word Mopla is also used for Christians, also for the Muslim traders. So Moplas probably could be traders either of Muslim or of Christian origin, and who came from different sources. And from Baghdad, there are evidences that we had a lot of people coming. From Syria, we have evidence that a lot of people were coming, and many parts of the Arab world. But from the Moorish land, there is not much evidence that Islam has moved to the Malabar coast. The Christianity did not come from these places. The Christians were in the mainstream Spain, and they were coming and defeating them. Christians did not leave the place there. They first surrendered and became part of the system. And later, when the Catholic forces came, they became the predominant force, and they got other people converted and pushed out all the Muslims. That was the structure. So Muslims, there is, I don't know, at least for my knowledge, there was no huge conversion or no major move to southern India or to Malabar coast from Granada. It was all going to present-day Morocco, the northern Africa. That was the major part. Northern Africa and the poorer parts of the Arabian land, they have gone. Apparently Jews, we do not know, because Jews have been moving, different parts of the world. And the Jewish presence in southern India is pretty old than this period. I have no clue or evidence at this moment whether the Jews who were leaving the Moorish land or Granada have reached southern India. To my knowledge, they came much earlier, the people who were there.
May I add something to it?
Yeah, please.
You know, my parents, both mother side and father side, grandparents were called Mapla. You know, in my childhood also, but now they both sides are passed away. I didn't know if they were called Mapla. Now you said they may be came from either Morocco or some area like that. And then these Moors, are they dead and gone? There is no more Moors left in Spain and Granada. They are wiped out, or
no, the people there, the people in this area, it's known as the Iberian people. If we normally say the Balkan people or Benelux people, and the people who live in this part of Spain are called Iberian people. Iberian people are there. Iberian people are of Islamic origin, or with Islamic background or Christian background or Jewish background. The Iberian people are there. Most of the Iberian people who are there, they were originally some other people, but when Christianity came, they became Christians. Then many of them turned into Islam because it was forced upon them. And many of them returned back to Christianity because it was forced upon them. And many of them left the Iberian Peninsula and went to Northern Africa, Morocco, and all these places. And they got merged into that societies there. So Iberian people have moved in a huge exodus in the 13th century. They moved a lot of people to the other parts of Northern Africa. So they are there, of course. I mean, if, for example, if somebody from India would go to Singapore and settle down, and they are Indian origin people or Chinese who live for example, places like Singapore or Indonesia or Malaysia or some places like that. They are people of Chinese origin. Still, they are people of Chinese origin. The Iberian people are there in Morocco. Iberian people are there in Egypt. They are in many parts of Northern Africa. In Libya, Lebanon, you can see Iberian people. There is a pan-Iberian movement also to get the Iberian land together.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, then next, Jihanudi.
I haven't read much about the Spanish history, and I heard a lot from the Islamist group.
Yeah.
So I'm asking, is what you have said here is different from the mainstream history?
Well, I mean, okay, tell me. Yeah.
One more thing, so just for a fun, I am asking. You have said that the then king invited the Arab forces to Spain, and still you compared them with the camel in the tent. Why?
I'll tell you. I'll read. I mean, first of all, you allege that I'm not speaking from the mainstream history or a subversion of history of my interpretation or something like that. I was quoting the main articles or books I have made notes of are all published by international publishers, which include the university publishing like Cambridge and Oxford. And also there's a huge set of articles reproduced by BBC on their document site. So this, if BBC republishes something, some classical articles published elsewhere, there's a huge section in BBC about all these classical articles. And that cannot be called, if it's not mainstream, what it is, it's a kind of a trivial version of history or something like that. No, it cannot be called like that. This is from the Islamic Spain from 711 to 1492. There is one major article on BBC site. You can see that. If anybody wants, I can send you links also. A huge, hundreds and hundreds of pages of article. I've been reading quite a lot, but one can get a clue of the whole thing. For example, the journey, the conquest. This is from BBC site. Okay, I'll read one part of it. The traditional story is that in the year 711, an oppressed Christian chief, Julian, I didn't go to the whole story in fine details because that would take, several hours to understand. But since you said that, Julian went to Musa ibn Nusair, the governor of North Africa, with a plea to help against the tyrannical Visigoth ruler of Spain, Roderick. I mentioned about Roderick. Musa responded by sending a young general, Tariq bin Ziyad, with an army of 7,000 troops. The name Gibraltar is derived from Jabal al-Tariq, which is in Arabic Rock of Tariq, named after the place where the Muslim army landed. The story of the appeal for help not universally accepted. There is no doubt that Tariq invaded Spain, but the reason for it may have more to do with the Muslim drive to enlarge the territory. That's what it is explained. There is a Muslim drive to enlarge the Islamic territory. Also, there is a Christian drive to enlarge the Christian territory. These two conflicting ideas to enlarge their territory, to defeat the whole world or convince the whole world their ideology is what is expansionism. That is what is happening here. The reasons. So after the first victory, one reason for the rapid Muslim success was the generous surrender terms that they offered to the people, which contrasted with the harsh conditions imposed by the previous Visigoth rulers. I've explained that also. They made easy conditions, and when you surrender, you become, you have all your rights. You will be, your culture and everything can be maintained. So fine. After that, the heartland of Muslim rule was southern Spain of Andalusia. The name Andalusia comes from the term Al-Andalus, used by Arabs, derived from the Vandals who has been settled in the region. Now, the next part is, that is very, very clearly explained how they expand is not the Muslim rule suddenly expanded to new territories as there were less resistance and less army available. The expansion of Islam as an idea was the major driving force. Not all the Muslim rulers in Spain were tolerant. Al-Manur looted churches and imposed strict restrictions. Christians were not allowed taller houses than Muslim houses, could not employ Muslim servants, and had to give way to Muslims on the street. So these kind of things are also there. But finally it changes. Surrendering terms were changed. So the idea was to expand the idea of Islam or a territory. So they asked for an army of 7,000 people. That was an old practice. In wars, for example, if you don't have army, you can go, that was the old practice of all kingdoms all around the world. If you have a friendly neighbor country, you will ask the support of that country, ask for a certain number of troops for you. I want 10,000 soldiers from your side. So it sends some commanders with the soldiers to fight the common enemy. So once you have done the job, there is a condition in the agreement. you get a certain amount, maybe for next 5 years, you would get this much money every year, because you get a territory which otherwise you would lose, or you would give a certain amount as a reward to the payment of the army. That's a universal practice. But when an army comes with 7,000 people for a cold job, they would not go back. That's why it's an invasion. They would not go back. Rather, they remain there and eventually take over and further expand and recruit further and bring in more army and further expand. That is why it was compared as a camel entering into a tent. But such things happened elsewhere also in history. I mean, there is nothing, accusing somebody, but I mean, classically, this was the case. Yeah, let's go to the next question.
As usual, it's been a pleasure listening to you. I've learned a lot of new things. Now, my question is my question's a little academic. Throughout history, we've seen this reference to Islamic Golden Age, and including in your presentation, we heard about the times when the Islamic leadership and the Muslim population actually decided to distance themselves from Islam, is the period being referred to as Islamic Golden Age. We have heard of the Catholic or the Christian Dark Ages, but we never credit the era of the Industrial Revolution as the Christian Golden Age. But whenever we see an Islamic caliphate that has been liberal, is not basically following all of the tenets of Sharia or Islamic laws, we refer to that as Islamic Golden Age. So why credit that time, that golden era, to Islam? That's my question. Basically, an Islamic Golden Age.
I understand. Question. Yeah.
Afghanistan should be called as a region that is enjoying an Islamic Golden Age, which is true to Islam. I'm just giving it as an example, not exactly 100% correct. Not everyone's going to agree to that. Saudi Arabia, that is Islamic. You're not allowed to practice any other faiths. You have a certain dress code. So why aren't those places being called as experiencing Islamic Golden Age? Whereas in history, lots of scholars, historians, including the mainstream ones, refer to the time when Islamic rulers and the Muslim population were a little deviant from the true tenets of Islam, and they refer to it as Islamic Golden Age, including the period we live in. That's how they refer to those times. Why do you think that is the case? Thank you.
Yeah, I always insisted that we cannot consider that as a golden age of Islam, because the better part of this rule of the Muslim Moors was not Islamic in its fundamental idea. For example, all the basic ideas of Islam or the faith of Islam were denounced by them. They were people of Muslim origin. For example, they had no problem for people having pork or wine, and they were serving wine in the royal palace. The Moor kings and Muslim kings were serving wine in the royal palaces. They had dance, they had music, they had sculpturing. I mean, replicating a human image was a sin for Islam, but they were having sculptures, everything was there. So this cannot be called a Muslim period. This can be a period of Moors. That's why I call it the Moorish Spain. That's why I would like to call it, or the Granada, the Empire of Granada, which was, I mean, people of Muslim origin. But why many people, almost all the mainstream historians call this as the golden age of Islam. But it's a golden, it's an oasis of relief in otherwise dark age of Europe. That's the ground reality. The comparison is a relative position. In mainstream Europe, it was really dark age. Anybody who had a different faith would go into torturous death. Imagine that, you are comparing with that. And the church officially everywhere making torture machines to break your legs, crush your hands, pluck your breast, pluck your eyes, or put all nails around you and crush you into it if you had a different faith. Here, in the same Europe, there is a place where you can have a different faith. But that's why I insisted that, but also on the other side, I've gone deep into the period. So therefore, I'm telling that it was not, you cannot compare that as a golden age with our yardsticks of now. You cannot compare that period and say it's a tolerant place if you consider the 22nd century's value system. They were, for example, Christians were allowed to make churches, but there was a rule that no church should be above the lowest mosque in the city. The height should be limited. It should be under the lowest, the height of the church which has the lesser height there. If one church has, say, for example, 100 feet height, the lowest height of a mosque was that, you can have 98 feet, not more than that. It was never allowed anywhere. Number two, eventually it shifted into a second-class citizenship for other people. And there's a kind of a discriminatory system. People were, they could be citizens. They were not tortured and killed like in the Dark Ages in the Catholic Europe, whereas you could have your faith, but you have to pay a price for that. You're a second-class citizen. So I would say that it's a relative position of telling it as a golden age. I would not call it as a golden age. It's a kind of a comparatively better time of, in mainstream Europe, different than the mainstream Europe, where, for example, knowledge was respected. That's another side. That is why many people call it as a golden age or a ray of light in the darkness, because they respected knowledge. Scholars were encouraged, and you could study. Libraries were made. And at one side, if you know that history, in the Catholic Europe, for 2.5 centuries, taking a bath was a sin. There are some Catholic scholars, I would one day keep up with that. I've read a lot about that period. If you take a bath, it was a sin. You're not allowed to take a bath. You could wash your armpit and your private parts with water in a tub only. And if you take a bath, the evil will enter into your body. So there were people were stinking probably very well. I mean, I've read an article somewhere that the perfume industry began its growth during those times. So at that time, here, the public bathhouses were made. In the mainstream Europe, it was not allowed. So that is why it's a comparative position. It's not a golden age, it's an oasis of a better life. But with our standards from now, a discriminatory society where people of other faith were, second-class citizens or third-class citizens cannot be called a perfect society. But as compared to what we have, you can have slaves in that society, but a non-Muslim cannot have a Muslim slave. A Muslim can have a non-Muslim slave. So this is a society which was divisive, discriminatory, privileged people and underprivileged people, hierarchical structures. The Muslim predominance was established even in the better part of it. Later decline and degenerates, and that's another part of it. But even in the better times, it was with a lot of discriminations and all. But, well, it's called by many historians as golden age because on the other side, you have dark ages in the Catholic world. It was before Reformation. So that was really, really dark ages. That is why I would like to call it with a different name. I mean, also this was different from the mainstream Islam. The Arabian Islam or the Muhammad's Islam was very different. 120 years after Muhammad's period, there was a different Islam where they could accept art and literature and sculpture and everything possible, people with the Islamic origin. So that, they got adapted to the new situation also. And it got, they got a lot of ideas and views were exchanged each other. So that is why it is called a golden age, not by me, but by main historians. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanal. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Deepak. And I think there's no one at the moment. We will come back to Clubhouse after Zoom. And there is a Zoom, Saptarshi. You may ask your question.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Good evening. Nice seeing you.
So, sir, is it? I will ask two things. One from history and one from current affair. One is the when we talk about this European conquest of Islam, we always, this conquest, it happened because people were fleeing away from various places, and there was a Fatimid dynasty also in northern Africa, which I think ended by the time 1100 or 1200 CE.
Yes.
It ended.
Yeah.
So it was not a united Islamic invasion as such, or spreading of the Islamic thing as such. So how do history? Because I think people look at history, and many Islamic countries try to follow that history and try to bring it here. But one of the major things is that succession was not proper, especially during Muhammad's time itself, because that led to this division within the Islamic fold. There was a division between Abu Bakr and Ali, and then this Shia, Sunni, and different things, and they spread out. They carried their conflict also within themselves. So do you think this is a problem with all the Islamic dynasties, that they don't have a proper succession planning? None of the Islamic dynasties had a proper succession planning, which led to a lot of problems, and they had these difficult issues. Because even in Mughals, we see they didn't have a proper, everyone was fighting with everyone. Nowadays also in Islamic countries, we see the same thing, that succession planning is not there. The second question I will ask after this.
Yeah, I mean, let's take facts and try to see the position. Let's take the, 2-3 different cases. The Mughal Empire. From Humayun, there is a clear succession to Akbar. He was out of power. Akbar was born in a desert, but there is a clear succession to Akbar. Then from Akbar, Jahangir, there is a clear succession. From Jahangir to Shah Jahan, there is a clear succession. But Shah Jahan's son, Dara Shikoh, was the person who should come to power. But there, the younger brother assassinates all of the brothers, especially Dara Shikoh, again, because he was translating Upanishads. That is one of the major provocation period. Many people do not speak about it. Upanishads were first translated into Persian. That was the first ever translation by Dara Shikoh, Shah Jahan's elder son. He was a scholar of Sanskrit as well as Persian. And that was not liked by the clergy. And they encouraged Aurangzeb to overthrow him and stop him becoming the emperor. So it was not a succession issue. It was an ideological issue of fundamentalist Islam and a tolerant version of Islam. So there, the younger brother was convinced by the clergy to overtake and implement their version of Islam. That is the conflicting point. And if you take the Alhambra Fort and Granada and the Moorish Empire, which I was speaking about now, there also you see, first the small army comes and they take over. And of course, this is a long period from 700 to 1200. That's around 500 years, half a millennium. It's a long period. Over the time, there are several exchanges of power. More and more people were coming. More and more people were expanding their positions. The kind of succession was not properly established because it's not a royal family that begins the whole thing. So if there is a royalty, those times, royalty, once it's established, it has a succession way of succession. So, but till a royalty was established, the succession became difficult. Even when there is royalty, there is a lot of power struggle with it. Now let's take a non-Muslim structure, the Roman Empire. If you see Roman Empire, you see the same kind of thing. Every emperor is in a great struggle. The biggest trouble or a struggle for an emperor is to find the right successor. And most of their later part of their life, they are struggling to identify the right successor, making them equipped. You can see, for example, people like Caligula, who cannot identify a right successor. How he was identified, for example, how Caligula was identified. That is just he was imprisoned first, and he was a prisoner taken into and in full confidence, and finally he was made an emperor. So the succession became a permanent issue. Nero, you can see the successors were sometimes not, the so-called successors were not sometimes trusted sisters and brothers were killed. I mean, all these kind of things we can see in Roman Empire. So these all empires, where there is power, there is a struggle for the control of power. And where there is power, there is an effort to get in control of the power. So it's not a question of one faith or one system, but the power calls for the desire for getting more power. And power always, sense the necessity for continuation. Like the primary cell wants to continue, every mammal wants to continue, every species wants to continue, systems also want to continue. If you see an organization, it wants to continue. Our own institutions, it wants to continue. We find ways that institutions continue. For example, a nation is an institution also, with the geographical area, territory, language, and all these kind of things. At the end of it, with the government, it's an institution. It wants to continue. It's a human creation. So when anything wants to continue, it has a struggle for the authority of it. So it's a natural law.
Okay, sir, the other question is about this currently, like you are saying, Mohammed bin Salman and this UAE, and they are struggling to modernize their countries. But don't you think these Islamic countries, whenever there is problem, they say that the solution is to become more Islamic? If they have a problem, like now in Turkey, we see they are saying the problems we are facing is because we are running away from Islam. In Pakistan also, they are saying we will bring back Riyasat-e-Madina. So if Saudi Arabia tries to change things, they will face internal problem, and Iran is always there. Iran will also prick them because Iranian people otherwise are quite modern, means the community itself seems quite modern. And the government there is very conservative and very, what will I say, it is autocratic. So they will again try to make, problems for Saudi Arabia. Means within Grenada, if we take the example, there was internal issues. But for Saudi Arabia and UAE, countries like Iran, which in spite of US sanctions has actually, they have existed. They have not got devastated. They are existing quite well actually. So they may come and create problems for them rather than their internal things. Internal problems will be there, but Iran and other forces like Islamic non-state actors, they will create problems more for these countries.
Certainly, they would try to make problems because also Iran and Saudi Arabia classically has a conflict. The conflict is based on their, the shade of faith. Iran is mainly Shia faith, predominantly Shia faith, and it's one of the major centers of the Shia faith. And in Saudi Arabia, they are in the broader division, they are Sunnis. And so therefore, there is a dislike for each other. There are classical dislikes in many areas, India and Pakistan, or all these kind of divisions in different parts of the world. You can see these kind of conflicts. So there's a classical conflict between these two areas. So therefore, it may not be very easy to penetrate into Saudi Arabia to make a conflict, but an external conflict is always possible. So like Iran and Iraq had a war, that's an external conflict. A conflict into the penetrating into a system and creating a trouble within for an ideology may not be very possible because of the huge divide between these two ideological positions of Islam. But on the other side, the major argument that you put forth is very, very important, that there can be forces from within challenging the desire of the country, or the goal of the country is the biggest trouble. The internal trouble is a bigger trouble than trouble coming from outside. You can allow internal troubles. You can ride a horse if the hook is in your hand. You cannot ride an avalanche because avalanche takes you down. You cannot ride it. So that's the difference. If it becomes an avalanche where you are part of it and you are rolled by the avalanche, then you cannot do anything. But riding a horse, if you are an expert, and even a troublesome horse, if you are skilled, you can ride. Sometimes troublesome horses are faster. So sometimes troubles are good for a state. For example, to suppress something, many states use this classical strategy. Machiavelli says this in our Arthashastra, it's explained. I mean, for example, if you want to suppress a situation, you allow them to erupt a dissent. And once you get a dissent, it's easy to suppress it. That has happened in Granada also. The first suppression against the local community was mainly they encouraged. That's how it is explained. They encouraged a dissent. They promoted a difference of opinion and dissent. Once it erupts up, then you have a reason that justifies your action on them. So this could be one way that, for example, Tabligh now in Saudi Arabia, Tabligh is now banned. Why it's banned? Because Tabligh is criticizing the political system's plan to change the whole thing. Therefore, conservative Islam. So Tabligh represents a grand class of Muslim clergymen who interpret and give fatwas. And the royalty simply decided to ban it. That's a strong position. So when there is a social change, there are forces normally coming within in a limited way is good. That will give you an opportunity for a campaign. If there is no response, you have no opportunity. You know, look at sometimes when you handle a political situation, it's always better that difference of opinion are encouraged. People of different positions are encouraged to air their position. It looks conflict, but conflict is always good because then you get an opportunity to articulate your position. When it's silently going, you cannot articulate your position. So any kind of a system like Saudi Arabia would encourage criticism, controlled criticism, which they could use, for example, if they articulate about the political system to counter it. And I think if one is determined, one can handle this ulama because they have they have a lot of money now. There's very powerful military is another. I mean, if you have money and if you have a strong military and a determined mind, you can transform a society. And you said the example of Turkey, that societies can get reversed. Now, for example, now they want to go back to Islam. The problem is Islam. But on the other side, if you think Saudi Arabia, I mean, this Turkey was once the center of Islam of the whole world. Like Alhambra was the headquarters of the whole, it was a caliphate at once. But in Turkey, the caliphate of the whole world, Islam was in Turkey. The Sultan of Turkey was also the Sultan of the whole Muslims in the world at that time. That is why during the First World War, when Britain attacks Turkey, I mean, all Muslims all around the world felt that their world headquarters is attacked. It's something like Vatican is attacked. So now at that time, during that time when, for example, even in far off India, Indian National Congress was adapting a policy of Khilafat movement to get those feeling of Muslims diverted to a national struggle. But in Turkey, the system collapsed because Mustafa Kemal Atatürk came and transformed it and made a secular government. So establishment of a secular government was the first priority, first change that they had. So they opted for secularism. So that was going on very well, but of course it has a limitation. Military was a major force. Mustafa Kemal Pasha it was a military coup. The military was still in very powerful position, like in Pakistan. In Turkey, the secular Turkey was controlled by the powerful force of the military. So military shifts its loyalty, things can change. So the present leadership is pro-Islam, but not radical Islam. He's an Islamist, but still he keeps the system. It doesn't fundamentally go away. So I would say that there is a conflict in the society between these two ideas of secularism as well as of conventional Islam. And there is a shift of leadership and there is a change. Once there is a shift on the other side, when the leadership changes, it could reverse back to the traditions of Kemal Atatürk also. But Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and even Iran, when it wants to change, it's easier for Saudi Arabia to change because it's a royalty there. It's not the clergy that's ruling. In United Arab Emirates, they are the the kings are ruling there. So it's a political decision that is required to change it. But in Iran, you need a political decision coming from Iran. They have a democratic system. There is an elected government. But above that, you need a sanction of the clergyman at the top to sanction everything. That is not there in Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. This clergy at the top is the most dangerous thing. You cannot have any change. It can be vetoed. So change in Iran is more radically in a political decision, which would need more adventure than in Saudi Arabia. If they want, since they have all powers in their hand and there is no democratic elections, it may be easier to change the system to a better one. Also to change it back to a worse one. Both are possible for a monarch.
But don't you think if Saudi Arabia modernizes, there will be a greater demand in Iran from the people to modernize, because that community as such seems more educated, and there was a Pew survey which said already 50-60% people don't practice religion. So the clergy will be under threat if Saudi Arabia modernizes. And even maybe Pakistan, I don't know about Pakistan, maybe they will also modernize.
Yeah, in Iran, as you rightly said, there is a survey that says that more than 51% of the population are not practicing Islam, though it's an Islamic state. And more than 56% of the people would like to go out of the country if they have an opportunity to a non-Muslim country. These are, confirmed, studies about the Iranian society. So, but all the same, one has to also see that they had a freer society before the 1970s Islamic rule came. They had a freer society, they had higher education centers, but still Iran, why they could not be stopped? That is another question you asked, why they could not be stopped despite the sanctions, is that they have infrastructural resources there. They have many things required for the country within the country. For example, they produce a lot of dairy products. They are exporting dairy products to Europe. That is why Salman Rushdie has once written an article. The cheese, they like the Danish cheese. The Iranians import a lot of Danish cheese and they export a lot of food products outside. They have food produced in the country. They have a very large rural population who are in production of food material, like in India. And a rural population producing things are not demanding very much in the consumer market. If you take the classical angle of economics, a rural population who are in production are not demanding products, means you are not selling a lot of things within the country. Your requirement to sell things are limited. But if you are more developed in a country, the people want to buy more and more things. They want more products. If the urban pop, if they become more urbanized or they become modernized, they need more products. And if there are no products, people will be unrest. Even if you have money, if there are no products, people will be unhappy. When there is sanction, you don't get products, especially international products. But since the people who demand international production or quality production are the urban people only, and their number is very less. The majority, like in India, in Iran, are rural people. In an urban society, if there is a sanction, they will feel strangulated. And as a semi-rural or mainly rural and semi-urban society, it's easier to handle. That's why, for example, a sanction on North Korea would work easily, because the urbanization is very, very less there. It's only 12.8 urbanized. The rest is rural. So the rural requirements are limited. You can produce things. You can produce your chicken. You can produce your meat. You can produce your milk. You can produce your vegetables. And international supply is not required for that. But if you want international products, then the requirement is very, very different. That's why sanctions would not work in Iran or North Korea. So that is one thing, that sanctions may not work. But on the other side, Saudi Arabia is more a consumer society. Even the people who are looking after even the shepherds, they would come to the cities and they want quality life because they are now used with spending. So Saudi Arabia, it's more and more a consumer society because the wealth is coming from the oil. People are not producing wealth, but the state is rich and people are, comparatively rich. And they need products. And how do you, when you get products, the products are multifarious. It's not only food, it's entertainment, it's music, it's art, it's sports. These all are products. So when they have money and they cannot spend, you see people from Saudi Arabia going to Indonesia, they go to Thailand, they go to America, they go to Europe and spend their money. If they produce the products there, make it available there, they will be comparatively peaceful people because they can spend it there. And the money will remain in the country also. And that's an economically wise decision also because it's a consumer state. So I would say that the dissent can be addressed very easily in Saudi Arabia because it would not attract any kind of international objection against that, number one, because even if it comes, it doesn't matter. I mean, they are still producing oil. We would need oil for at least next 15 to 20 years. So, and after 20 years, when the societies change, when oil is no more a requirement, because almost everywhere it's changing, the cars are changing, everything is moving to a new direction. So they have to change now, change or perish. That's the only question they have. When people don't want oil, either they have to go shepherds again. No, they cannot. They have now experienced a high quality life with a lot of money. They have a lot of money really, which they can invest into productive things and into high quality life and get people spend there. That may be a wiser economic decision also and good for the world because it would be less, fanatic area in the world.
So I want to use this note to thank you and congratulate you on the excellent presentation. Keep on shining. That was flawless. Also, we are all happy to see very beautiful Shakti. Thank you for joining us here. Thank you for finding some time for us too. And you may convey that message to her, Sanal, as she is not here.
Yeah.
Also for the audience, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all of you who generously helped us to make this event come together to become a success. And thank you very much. And we will see you all see you at the same time next week with another interesting topic. Till then, take care and enjoy your weekend.
Maybe one more small thing I would like to announce that this group that we have now, for this English meeting, that is a group namely Rationalist. Perhaps the name will be changing into Rationalist, but join that group because the English meetings will be held now in the Rationalist group. There will be more and more English meetings coming, but we have now groups in a language which is very, very, very articulate language in India, Malayalam, which happens also my mother tongue. Very active groups going on there, and we have a new group also coming up there. But also we are planning a group in Hindi. Very soon that will be there. But follow Rationalist and we'll see soon again. Thank you.
Okay, so we will end this now, right?
Thank you, Deepti, for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.